Welcome to episode 322 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about BioWare's big moves to focus on Mass Effect, the Division 2 delays their Brooklyn DLC, Phil Spencer's Xbox Media Blitz, and much more. Before we get started, thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this show and all of my other content, check out the links in the show description. Subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. You can now leave comments on the Spotify episodes, or you can leave comments on the YouTube video, or join my Discord for more conversation about these topics. Gaming news, let's jump into the main story. We had a few to pick from this week, but the one I kind of care the most about, and the one that has had the most developments, I would argue, has been BioWare's big studio update blog and the fallout that has come since. We'll see how many diehard Dragon Age fans listen to this, because my takes at the end of this segment may not be super popular. Luckily, it's not the biggest podcast in the world. Reach is pretty minimal, so I'm not super worried about it. And it's probably not as bad as I think. But long story short, on January 29th of 2025, Gary McKay, who is the general manager of BioWare and has been for 3 or 4 years now, they posted a blog that stated the studio was completely focused on development of the next Mass Effect game under a veteran team of directors. So that was the good part. Like, if you just want good news about BioWare and the next Mass Effect and all that stuff, then just, turn off the podcast now or skip ahead, and it'll be like everything was all good. But of course, whenever there's a BioWare blog with no pictures, it's typically not a good thing. And this was the other part of the blog. So along with this focus, they've determined the studio is larger than it needs to be for their current needs, and they've made an effort to place mini devs with other EA studios. This is something I've been talking about for a minute, whether it's been on my streams or in my Discord, or I've probably mentioned it here and there on the podcast. And I still I saw it, and I still do mostly see it as a good thing. It's always been common that when video games, they go through a 3-4 year development cycle of where they have all the people working, right? All the creatives, all the artists and stuff like that. And then when they put the game out, historically, it was especially common for them to clean house, for, most of the people to just lose their jobs, especially contractors, especially junior level people, that, once you put the game out, you didn't want to have to pay millions of dollars a month to people to just sit around, because the way a lot of these studios work is they release a game, then they take a little break, and they go into pre-production on another game, which may have started during development with a small team, but maybe not. And during the time that they're in pre-production, they don't need 300 people. They need 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. I don't really know. I'm mostly guessing, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the number. And while some studios, including BioWare at one point, used to be so big and had so many plates spinning at once with multiple projects, so when you finished on one project, you could get shuffled over to another one without too much downtime. That's not what's happening with BioWare anymore. And I think I talked about this last week with Mark Dara's video, a former BioWare, veteran developer who actually returned for the Veilguard for Dragon Age on a consultant basis. Even in a recent video, he said, if they're transitioning to just one game at a time, which is what was confirmed in this blog and had been talked about before, you don't need 300 or 400 devs all the time. So late last year, after the release of Dragon Age the Veilguard, I started noticing, and people were announcing, some of the BioWare developers hey, I'm over here working at Ripple Effect on the next Battlefield game, or I'm working on EA Motive on the next Iron Man, or whatever temporary positions these people were going to. At least they thought they were temporary. Um, what happened is, as part of this blog and I guess events at the studio, that happened this week, a bunch of these people who had gone to other studios, they thought temporarily, found out that they were just at that studio now. um I even found out, and I talked to someone who gave me the impression that as of this week, they were potentially, at least under the impression, they were on the Mass Effect team, and they are being moved to another studio, which is interesting. That's not great. That's not great communication, right? If you give them, especially BioWare, no one gives EA the benefit of the doubt, and not many will give it to BioWare. But if you did, you would say that that was the intent, was for these people to go temporarily to these other jobs, and something changed. Either, because of the profit stuff with Dragon Age the Veilguard, maybe they decided it wasn't sustainable to keep these people, or to bring these people back as quickly to the BioWare payroll. Because if they're not making anything, it's kind of what I talked about before. Um, my guess is that over the last few months, as the Mass Effect team came off of Dragon Age and has returned to Mass Effect and are working on pre-production, getting that scaffolding ready to go into production for that game, maybe they sent these people temporarily to these other studios, assuming that they were going to start full production like now, or at least fairly soon. And then it's worth the money. But maybe they're in a stage of pre-production where they realize, like, oh, it's gonna be like another 6 months or more before we can really get into full production. We don't need 200, 300 people at the studio right now. We have nothing for them to do. And so, on one hand, and this is the sentiment I've gotten from a handful of people I've talked to from BioWare, or formerly BioWare, of people saying, like, I mean, I'm thankful to still have a job, but I'm really bummed because I wanted to work on Mass Effect. I was kind of surprised. I think there's a lot of apathy in game development right now. I know from the fan side, there obviously is. But even from like the developer side, from the people I talk to, it seems like they do generally enjoy what they do, and they're proud of what they do. But you can definitely tell, and this isn't just people from BioWare, but people from all kinds of studios who I've chatted with and stuff, that there's just a lot of apathy with game dev right now, where it seems like everyone kind of just assumes that at any moment their studio could get shut down. At any moment they could lose their job and get laid off, or get moved to another studio, like what happened here. And that sucks. That's not fun. That's not very comfortable. And every time this stuff happens, people leave uh people leave the industry forever. The thing I've been told is that, maybe not everyone, especially the very, the art side of the creative, but a lot of these folks, especially the programmers and things like that, people who work on the engine and all that, they could take that experience and go work in other parts of the tech industry and make way more money, and maybe be more stable. You'll come to find that the entire tech industry isn't all that stable, and some of it is is even way more volatile than the games industry. But that doesn't make it any better for these folks. Um, so this was weird. I'll say that out of the multiple dozen of devs I follow on social media or interact with in general, I would say a majority of them seem to have been moved, or have left the studio entirely. That was one of the frustrating things about this blog, was that they did announce that, hey, we've been placing people with other studios, and now that's just where they're going to be. That wasn't told to, at least I'm not under the impression most of those people were under that impression, but that's what's happening. What they didn't mention in the blog is that there's people who straight up got fired, or and lost their jobs. I don't know an exact count. It seems like it wasn't nearly as many or who have been placed. It seems like the majority of people who are no longer at BioWare are in EA somewhere at another studio. But it's a non-zero number of people who aren't with BioWare or EA at all anymore. And there definitely is a very strong lean towards this it being a lot of the narrative and writing people. It includes what was it, Trick and Karen Weeks, who are, you know, pretty legendary in the BioWare community for a ton of work on the Mass Effect trilogy, and they've touched basically everything that BioWare's done for the last, you know, 15 years or so at least. So um, the pretty popular couple of people with the community, as well as multiple other people who, you know, were well known and veterans and people who had worked there for 10, 15, 20 years, who aren't there anymore. Um, this is a weird one. One thing I guess I have to point out is we don't know if some of these people were offered, like, hey, we just don't need you right now. You know, we're gonna send you over to EA Motive or these other ones, and potentially some of these people were just like, I'm good, I'm out, see ya. You know, the impression I'm under from some of the people I talked to was that even the people who were temporarily put on other studios, and that's now a permanent solution. I believe that in theory they could leave as well, but that there's some issues with benefits that wouldn't be very good for them if they did leave. So there's a little bit of kind of, in my opinion, kind of shady dealings happening there, and that really sucks. It really sucks that all these veteran developers, and especially writers, were let go. I saw some posts and stuff on social media, people showing that like basically every veteran writer is gone. Like at least as far as we know, like every notable or, you know, every known writer from the history of BioWare is gone at this point. And I guess I have some stuff to say about that. So let's talk about Dragon Age: The Veilguard. So I really like Dragon Age: The Veilguard. I named it as my game of the year in 2024. But if you asked me why I named it my game of the year, it would be because of the gameplay. And I thought some of the characters and their like personal kind of mission lines or you know, their quest lines were really, really good. I thought the game looked really great. I thought it ran extremely well. I was extremely happy with how bug free and such the game was. I like that the Dragon Age: The Veilguard felt like a very complete game, where we know, like with Inquisition, they released the whole DLC to finish the game and connect it to Veilguard. You know, this is a full and complete experience. A lot of the issues that like the OG fans have with Dragon Age, I don't have, because I kind of don't really care about Dragon Age that much, and I haven't played the other ones. I didn't like Inquisition. So if this game was targeting a more casual, less bought in audience, then that was me, and it was successful. Now, what I would acknowledge is that I wouldn't necessarily say the writing was the most impressive thing I've ever experienced in a video game. The vast majority of it, good to fine, you know, but probably more than I would prefer. Lots of moments of like, ugh. Like, I think my biggest issue with it was, you know, none of the grifter stuff, none of the weirdo stuff. Like Tasha's whole thing, her, you know, discovering her gender identity and stuff like that. Cool. Pretty normal thing to cover, especially in modern games. All good. My issue with Tosh wasn't that. Super cool. You know, figure your stuff out. All good. But I just found that character to be kind of annoying and kind of bratty and not very, I don't know, you know, a bunch of things that had nothing to do with that part of her story or their story. Um, I just didn't like the character. I never even finished their quest line. And it wasn't because of the quest line. It was because I kind of couldn't stand them. And other characters as well. You can tell how much of a Mass Effect fan I am that just happened to be playing Dragon Age, because all I could think about the entire game was like, I hope I get to kill Solus at the end. And that is not a popular opinion, at least not amongst the like diehard fans. So I think there's a conversation to be had that despite how legendary a lot of these people were on the writing team and in the narrative side of things, despite all of their incredible contributions to BioWare, I think if you take a step back, try to suppress the fandom a little bit and suppress that bias a little bit, and you look at the weaker parts of Dragon Age: The Veilguard, If you look at the weaker parts of Mass Effect Andromeda, I don't even want to throw Anthem into this because that game had such a minimal narrative that, like, whatever, you know. If you think about probably the weaker part of BioWare over the last decade, you know, I don't think it's impossible to guess that this was either it was forced by EA or maybe it was a decision by BioWare, but this was a clearinghouse of their narrative team, likely to try something different or to bring in some new blood or to bring in some veterans from the industry that weren't already there, right? Now, is that going to be a very attractive job, especially to veterans? Probably not. Like after they've, you know, between 2023 and now ditched basically their entire veteran, you know, narrative and writing team. I don't know if that's a great advertisement for your studio, and as well as all the other issues going on. But it seems like all the developer stuff where people got placed in other studios and on other projects and all that. Because even with them, I'm under the impression, at least from some people, that they are under the impression that while they're permanently with these new studios and projects, when Mass Effect begins full production, that there will be an opportunity for people to apply to come back, and I suspect that quite a few of those people will be able to do that. With the writing side here, these people, the majority of people who seemed like they were laid off, they weren't placed in other places. It felt more purposeful. Like this, like it seems like they kind of did like a soft layoff or a soft cost cutting with all of the like creative devs when it comes to like the actual like making the game. But with the writing side of this, it really to me feels a lot like they were just clearing house. Whether that's the right thing to do, the right move or not, I don't have any real strong opinions on it. I don't have the same fandom that other people do, even to the point where, like, you know, when they're talking about like Trick, you know, and about all of the characters and stories they wrote in Mass Effect 2 and 3, I would argue that some of those were some of the weaker things in the trilogy. But that doesn't change the fact that that individual is a legend in the studio, to the fan base is a legend, and to make this move and to do it what in a way that seems kind of cold hearted and you know, it's not a great look. Um, I I'm curious if their plan is to still return a lot of these devs to BioWare. I've been kind of racking my brain. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if, you know, the original intent was for it to legitimately be temporary. But then you have to think about these other studios like EA Motive and Ripple Effect, and these like John Epler is now the narrative director at the Skate Studio. I assume those studios don't want to have to just assume that a bunch of their people are that they're going to lose a bunch of people here in a few months, and that maybe there was some internal struggle between all the studios of them being like, hey, we want some kind of guarantee that we're going to have these people for a while for them to at least finish their jobs and stuff. And, you know, we don't want them to be kind of 1 foot in 1 foot out this whole time. And this was something that was kind of predicted by Mark Dara in a video he made that I covered in a previous podcast of, you know, this idea. It's cool to not just blanket fire all your devs when you don't need them anymore at the end of a project like the Veilguard, before a new project like Mass Effect begins, but that there are going to be some downsides to shipping off all of your developers to other studios, and that those studios may not want to give them up, especially for higher level, you know, responsibility people who, you know, producers and directors and things like that. Um, you know, people may get attached to that project and not want to come back. So then you're out that developer that you assumed you were getting back. Um, Not to mention, you know, people may feel thrown off or kind of put out by this and may not be motivated to come back anyways. Um, so I'm kind of curious if that played into this. At the end of the day, I suspect functionally, the people who want to come back, I bet a lot of them will be able to, but that's going to be dependent on a lot more factors than it was before. So, I think this was an interesting situation. I think the perspective to have from it, like from further back, is that like it's still good news. Like if you want another Mass Effect game, this blog was good news. The fact that they are making these pretty significant personnel moves, um, while it doesn't feel like it, should be encouraging, because the alternative is EA could just shut them down. Yeah, this Mass Effect project, it's not gonna be worth it. Let's just try to place everyone in all the other studios, and whoever's left, sorry, see ya. Like, bye. Like they could do that, especially after, it looks like Veilguard is going to struggle to likely even pay for itself. I think in the long run it will, but at least in the short term it hasn't. And these big corporations, it's all they care about is, what have you done for me now and lately? They don't care as much about the future, at least when they make these kind of decisions. But I don't want to completely lose the excitement of, they're talking about Mass Effect. Mass Effect is the next game. I made a video a few weeks ago about like how exciting it is that despite all the other stuff that's going on, which is all valid to think about and care about, they're making another Mass Effect game. And for the last, I got into the fandom in 2021 with the Legendary Edition. So for the last 3-4 years, my thing has been like, I know they're working on it, even though they weren't for a while. We know that now for like a year. But the whole thing has been like, they're doing pre-production, they're just dabbling, but they're working on Dragon Age the Veilguard. So like my hype and excitement was kind of minimal. Not really. I mean, I had a lot of hype and excitement, but it was knowing that there's another game first. But that game is out. And despite all of these issues, all of these problems, all of these not great signs, it still is, it's the next thing up. And if we assume that BioWare is going to continue functioning and developing a game, and that is the next game, and I don't want to completely lose that in all of the other stuff. One of the things that I really want to see them do is, we got this news this week out of the way. This coming Saturday on the 1st of February is BioWare's 30th anniversary. And then on the 4th of February is the Q3 2025 investor call from EA. I'm hoping that maybe we get some fun news on the anniversary. I suspect we're going to get some neutral or maybe good and bad news in the investor call. And then after that, assuming everything's good to go, I think it'd be really good for, maybe in February or March, for Mike Gamble and maybe more of the leadership of BioWare to do their own blog and say, it's been a rough year already. We're trying to figure things out just like you, the fans are. But here's what we're doing now. Here's what I'm working on. Here's where we're at with Mass Effect. Whether it's a full production announcement or not, who knows? Seems like that may not be coming super soon. But to just talk about the game. One of the issues with talking about the business side of this stuff is that like consumers don't really understand the business. We never have enough information to really understand the moves they're making. We don't have any of the background knowledge. Even the leakers and the influencers and journalists and stuff, they rarely get any really reliable news. They're mostly speculating just like we are. And speculation when it comes to people being moved studios and the studio getting smaller and this kind of news, it doesn't get digested very well by the regular gamer. Someone like myself, who's probably a more hyper focused person in the BioWare and Mass Effect community. It's the business talk. Even if I think it's good that we know what's going on, but it'd probably be better for them to give us that stuff, but then also follow it up with, we know that you guys are anxious. They probably are too. You have to keep in mind that I'm sure no one at BioWare right now is feeling real comfortable either. We know, this has been a weird, few years and blah, 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 but here's what's going on. And they talk about it. And Mike Gamble talks about, maybe the overarching, vision for the next game. And Mary DeMarley has a little part in a blog where she talks about, the things that she's inspired by and what she loved about the trilogy and, other maybe more modern, topics that she's interested in and exploring and stuff like that. And, and then other people from the team, whether it's technology, maybe one of the directors talks about Unreal Engine 5, if that's what they're using, and how excited they are to take advantage of some of these new technologies and just talk about the game. Like, we need to talk about the game. Like, give us these business updates when they happen. I think it's good to be transparent, even though they aren't very transparent, at least not in my opinion. As much as I rip on CDPR, CD Projekt Red, I think they're pretty transparent, especially when they're talking about the numbers of people working on different projects and stuff like that. Maybe give us some of that stuff, but talk about the game. It's not completely selfish. And then one of the final things here is if you know a like hardcore Dragon Age fan, check on them, because over the last couple of years when I'm more of a Mass Effect guy, but I've been dabbling in Dragon Age, and I'm glad I did. I enjoyed the Veilguard, but I'm not going to pretend like it turned me into a super fan. I'm going to play all the games. I'm not. I may do another Veilguard playthrough one day, but the Dragon Age fans are crashing out pretty hard. Like, and I don't blame them, and I don't want to be mocking of them, because there's a very real chance that in 3, 4, 5 years, hopefully the Mass Effect game comes out, and us Mass Effect fans may be in the exact same spot. So, I don't want to gloat in any way, shape, or form, because that's rude in general, but especially because their position may not seem all that unfamiliar to me one day, even though I hope it doesn't. But there's definitely some interesting stuff happening in that kind of in that community, if you've paid attention there, because and to be clear, with all the people who have been let go, especially the writing staff, Dragon Age, I would argue, is at best dormant, and at worst potentially done. And I say that in the sense of and even some of the people in my community talk to me about like back after Andromeda, when the impression was that Mass Effect's probably going to get put on ice for quite a while, which it has, other than the Legendary Edition. It was a similar reaction. So I want to be very clear that I don't think this is specifically the Dragon Age fans, but you can't blame them for being upset and maybe being even a bit hysterical to a point, because things aren't looking great, right? And as someone who's more in the Mass Effect side of things, it could be us next. For me personally, I'm pretty optimistic. That's kind of how I try to cover these things. That's how I try to talk about these things. With BioWare, I'm probably going to be riding and dying with them until they shut down, and hopefully that doesn't happen. That's my sincere hope. And I think, like I said before, they could have just shut them down. So I'm hoping that this struggle, and that these moves, and that these attempts to make themselves back into a studio that can continue on and make this thing that they want to make, it seems pretty likely that they're going through a stage of knock themselves down to the bare bones, all the directors and the essential people on the game, and then once they're in a spot to probably go into full production, expand out only as much as they need to. We're probably not looking at the days of, I don't know what the max employees was for BioWare, but I would imagine 500 or 600 people at one point. That's not the BioWare we have today. And we'll see if we ever get there again. I think my biggest concern is that if the next Mass Effect game gets made, I'm excited. I'm still optimistic. I'm going to have a pit in my stomach until they announce full production. Because between now and when full production gets announced, it probably wouldn't be that detrimental to EA to just shut the whole thing down. And that's what I'm kind of mentally preparing myself for. But once that full production announcement happens, then you really start pumping a lot of money into this project. Then it becomes less and less reasonable to just stop it. So if you're hoping for another Mass Effect game like me, be on the lookout for that full production announcement. That's probably the green light for most of us. But the amount of pressure and the expectations and just the responsibility of this Mass Effect game, because I've been saying for years at this point that I didn't think Dragon Age was, the last chance for BioWare. I've always felt that it was, it wouldn't hurt for it to do well, but that because of its development cycle, that I think EA probably wasn't expecting too much from it, but they will be expecting that for Mass Effect. From the next Mass Effect game, I have to imagine that's going to carry an impossible amount of pressure and weight for the future of that studio. Hopefully that leads to good results, but especially in the gaming kind of atmosphere right now, it feels like, even good games, like Dragon Age the Veilguard, sometimes struggle. And it could just be simply because of weird sentiment from the weirdest gamers, even though I don't really think that was definitely a problem for Veilguard. All of the grifters and gooners and weirdos um, were very loud, even if they were a small number. I truly, at the end of the day, believe that Dragon Age the Veilguard's biggest issue is that it kind of disrespected their OG fans. And well, someone like me, totally happy with what they did, because I didn't have any of those like expectations or whatever from the previous games and things that happened in them. I can see pretty clearly that, very reasonable people in my community who are never sensational and over the top about stuff, like, are straight up disappointed with Veilguard. Not because it has bad gameplay, it has great gameplay. I think that's pretty universal. And it has some good characters and some good writing and stuff like that. It's just it's not as connected to the series as it seems like a lot of those people wanted it to be in various ways. And there were choices made that people really don't like. And while I'm not there, I'm not in the same boat. Um, I've seen too many people who are reasonable be upset about the same things with Veilguard to not believe them. So hopefully that won't be an issue with Mass Effect. It's going to have the same issue as Dragon Age, the Veilguard. With, it's very likely that the next Mass Effect won't come out until 10 years after Andromeda, which already came out, a decent amount of time after the trilogy, which is when the series really peaked. To get that interest in it again, it's going to be a big challenge, but I'm going to remain hopeful. I'm going to cover every minute of it, and I'll be excited to talk about it more than the half hour we've already spent. Let's get into some other stories. Phil Spencer interviews with Gamertag Radio and Destin Laguirre. So we had an interesting some interesting interviews this week. Phil Spencer went on with a couple podcasts. This was in the wake of the really well received Developer Direct by Xbox for 2025 that showed off South of Midnight, Doom: The Dark Ages, Expedition 33, and of course I'm gonna forget the last one. Ninja Gaiden 4. And then also shadow dropped Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, the remaster or remake for modern consoles. This was interesting. It's every time Phil talks, it's so frustrating for me because it's so lucrative right now for people, whether it's just for clout or for clicks or whatever, to just literally like cut and splice the words he says to fit whatever narrative people are into. In these interviews, he reiterated for like multiple years in a row now that they will continue to put games on other platforms, including PlayStation and Switch. I think what I took from especially his Gamertag interview, but really both of them, and really just all of his interviews he's done for the last few years, is kind of this fundamental change in purpose for Xbox, and that just like PlayStation and Nintendo, it's always been a platform or a company that makes hardware and also makes video games for that hardware. That's still how PlayStation runs. That's still how definitely Nintendo runs. Most, if not basically all PlayStation games are only on PlayStation for a long time, like 2 or 3 plus years before they even come to PC, and they obviously don't come to Xbox. Nintendo never puts their stuff anywhere else except maybe mobile sometimes in different iterations. And that formula has been very lucrative for both of those companies. But for Xbox, they've been trying to copy that formula since the Xbox, the first one. And, in the 360 era, that was the best go they had at it. But at the end of the gen, they still ended up losing out on the console sale race to PlayStation and, in the consumer base. And then in the PlayStation 4 era with the Xbox One, because of a really, really bad marketing campaign and PlayStation taking advantage of that, PlayStation outsold, the Xbox more than it ever had. And that was also the beginning of the digital race. So now you have these 100+ million customers that have a PlayStation 4, who have a bunch of games on digital, even though they still buy a lot of physical. And that's just where they are now. And so, and with Xbox didn't have that benefit. Even though I think you could argue, and this is my bias coming out, that in many ways, I think that Xbox's hardware and software is very superior. They just didn't have the games, especially in the Xbox One generation. So now we come to the current day, and from all these interviews, what Phil was saying, at least my interpretation of it was, we are a publisher that makes games, and we also make hardware. So if you want to play on our hardware, we're going to do our best to make our hardware the best place to play our games. But if you want to play on the cloud, if you want to play on a Nintendo Switch 2, if you want to play on the PlayStation 5 or a PC or on the NVIDIA Shield or whatever, fine. If you want to play on a VR headset, whatever, we'll take your money. And for me, it's strange that has had so much pushback, because, and I'll talk about it here in a few minutes. At the end of the day, they could keep trying to do the old strategy and try to copy Nintendo and PlayStation, but multiple things have happened that will basically make that impossible for them to ever succeed, to ever be anything more than third place. You can even see it in the way things get covered now, where there's an entire generation of journalists and influencers and fans who, when they see that there's been 60 million PlayStation 5 sold and 30 million Xbox Series consoles sold, that means to them that PlayStation has done twice as well as Xbox this gen, and that's the measure, because that's what it's always been. People don't pay attention to like those leaked documents from the Activision Blizzard King acquisition, where it showed that, I think it was back in 2021, while PlayStation had double the revenue of Xbox had more profit, not just profit margin, but more profit, more money going home. And there's lots of reasons for that. They have the really popular subscription and Game Pass. They don't spend $500 million or even $250 million on The Last of Us 2 style games and stuff like that. Their expenses are different. They don't have those legacy single player titles. They have multiplayer games with microtransactions like Grounded and Minecraft and Sea of Thieves. They and now Call of Duty. It's because we don't get reliable numbers. The real measure to how profit, to how well these companies are doing would be their revenue and their profit margin and their profit. But we the only time we've gotten it is when it got leaked on accident by Microsoft. And because we don't get those numbers, people rely on the numbers we get. And right now it's console sales. And that's obviously where Nintendo kicks everyone's butt. PlayStation kicks Xbox's butt. And Xbox, at this point, basically looks like they're not even trying. They had like a 30% drop in console sales compared to last year, in the last month or whatever. So it's this interesting thing where, Phil talks. And I think if you listen to him, you can see where they're going, and you can already see signs that it's working extremely well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's so many of these people. There's a lot of console fans who are really, really stuck on the idea of like, that console is my identity. And if that console, if it's not a war between how many consoles we sell and they sell, then where's the most common thing I've seen is people saying that Xbox is not being loyal to their customers, which is the wildest concept I can ever imagine. The idea of having loyalty, thinking one, that a corporation would have loyalty to you is insane, is the most insane thing. And because let's be very clear, don't think for a second that PlayStation has loyalty to their customers, even though they're doing the things that some of these Xbox people or supposed Xbox fans are upset about. PlayStation has no loyalty to their customers. Be very clear about that. And so the idea of thinking that a corporation has loyalty to you, and then these people who have, I guess, this extreme loyalty to a corporation, who have really made this box their identity. And I'm talking about anyone. I'm not just talking about Xbox or PlayStation fans or whatever. Um, it's just a box to play games. And more that's becoming more apparent. And I think Xbox has very smartly decided we're never going to sell more consoles than PlayStation ever. It's never going to happen. It's never happened, even when we got really close, and it's never going to happen in the future. So we have to find another way to be successful and sustainable. And that's what they're doing. Let's get into some of the other stories here. So, because this complements it. So we found out a couple of days ago, Forza Horizon 5 is announced to be coming to PlayStation 5 in the spring of 2025, with rumors of the Master Chief Collection and Starfield and other games coming either later this year or next year. The timed exclusive, I'm super in support of. The idea of Forza Horizon 5 that came out like multiple years ago come to PlayStation. Forza Horizon 5 isn't selling Xboxes right now. Whatever, throw it on PlayStation. That's great. Even MCC and even Starfield at this point, it's, we're coming up on a year and a half. It's going to be a couple years later. By the time that comes out, Starfield's not selling Xboxes anymore. Get that money, take it in, because, and I think this is the part that it gets lost on people, is if you still want to buy an Xbox, so they're making another Xbox, there's going to be more hardware. If you want that, you want it to be subsidized, because I can guarantee you this next Xbox is probably going to have hardware in it that the equivalent PC is probably going to be like $1,000 plus. So Xbox could try to sell it for $1,000. I bet they won't. And the only way they can make it cheaper is to subsidize it. And that's with getting money from other revenue streams. And if you want the next Xbox to be $500 or $600, but be hardware equivalent to much more than that, you should love the idea of people buying Xbox games on PlayStation or Switch or Steam or, on PC, because those people aren't getting Game Pass and they're going to be paying full price. And so I think that point is lost on people. And part of why that's important is because Xbox players have Game Pass. It's very notable at this point. It's well publicized and often by console warriors and stuff that, Xbox gamers don't spend as much money on games as other platforms because they have Game Pass. And we pay a lot for Game Pass. Game Pass makes Xbox a ton of money, but it's probably not sustainable in the long run without other revenue streams, just like it wouldn't be sustainable to subsidize the next console. It's all subsidizing. So if you like your Game Pass or you want to buy an Xbox, the next one that's probably going to be really powerful, that they're claiming will be the biggest generational leap ever, probably using AI and stuff, then you should be fine. Like if you want more Xbox hardware and more Xbox games, I think you should be celebrating this, because it's not taking anything away from you. I keep seeing people say like, well, I'll just buy a PlayStation if all the games are going there. Okay. Sweet. Like, that's fine. Like, go nuts. If you want Game Pass, maybe you don't like Game Pass, maybe you don't want a subscription, maybe you don't play it enough to make it worth it, then maybe buying a PC is probably your best bet, really, unless you want to play PlayStation games within 2 or 3 years, and then you want a PlayStation, right? Even though PlayStation, you'll get some Xbox games quick, you're probably gonna have to wait a while for other ones, and you may never get some, but that's the choice you're making, right? I don't see the panic. I truly believe that there's definitely some people who maybe don't fully understand what's going on, who don't understand, like who just haven't been educated very well or something on the things that they're doing, or maybe they just don't like it. Totally fair. I still think the majority of the outrage and all of that, I'm still fairly confident that that's mostly people just baiting and rage baiting. It's influencers having the worst possible hot takes because they know it's going to get 10,000 views on their YouTube video. It's journalists who are working in a dying industry, doing everything they can and using the whipping boy to drum up clicks and views and even personal clout on social media and stuff. I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem like that big of a mystery, but apparently it is. A few other Xbox things here, which I think still do tie in. Baldur's Gate 3, the patch 8, which accidentally dropped early on PlayStation 5, which was kind of funny. Um, will add co-op for the Series S. If you remember, this is a huge talking point for people who want to crap on Xbox about how the Series S has made game development harder, and it's led to a bunch of games not coming to Xbox, which so far I don't think is true. I think every one of those issues has been resolved at this point. And what's interesting about this Baldur's Gate 3 thing is that this will return every single game on Xbox having feature parity between the S and X. Um, One of the things talked about in the Phil Spencer interview, I think it was in the Destin one, was about the Series S and how, would you guys potentially drop support for the S as you move forward? And his statement was really interesting. Phil Spencer's is that um, as the Steam Deck and the ROG Allies and all these handheld PCs get more popular, and more studios are going to have to account for those with their, with those to make their games work on those systems. The Series S is more powerful than all of those, at least so far. And so he was actually excited about it. He's like, the more of those handheld customers there are, the more reason and the more resources these studios can use to make their games work on lower end hardware like the S. And that he thinks, if anything, it's reinvigorating support for the S, because, you know, it's not just the 15 million S's they've sold. Now it's going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of handhelds. That makes it an easier decision for all these studios to invest resources into making their games work on lower end hardware. I thought that was really interesting, and I think this move by Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian to fix this long issue is really, really good. And then the last couple things here: Indiana Jones: The Great Circle had over 4 million players. They don't say sales, because a lot of it was probably Game Pass, and that was before it even comes out on PlayStation. That's really, really good. There was one console war account I saw that was like, and 75% of those 4 million players were PlayStation players. It's like, it's not over there yet, bud. But okay, sure. And then the final thing is Xbox was the #1 games publisher in the world in December 2024, with almost $500 million in revenue across all platforms. All of this conversation, all these moves they're making, all these people being upset, me talking about the subsidies thing, this is why they're doing that. I would say quietly, but it hasn't really been quiet. But I guess quietly, Xbox is the biggest game public, not the biggest platform, even though people accessing their platform, there probably is an argument to be made, even though Steam probably kicks their butt. I don't know. Or even Nintendo. I don't know. But them being the biggest publisher in the world last month, and this is probably going to be a trend, especially as they sell more games on PlayStation, as they sell games on Nintendo, as they continue PC support, as they had, it was 140 million hours or something of cloud play. I don't remember the time frame, so I won't guess, but it was impressive. It was a new record for them. I have tried the cloud multiple times. It's worked well with some stuff, not so well with others, but it's obviously something they're working on. And there were even stories recently that they've already upgraded the cloud system to have better latency, and that there's rumors that they're finally going to support higher FPS and even higher resolutions. I believe right now it's only 1080p, and that there's some talk that it may be able to support 1440 or even 4K in the future. So they need to do that, because even like the PlayStation streaming looks better than has better latency and better fidelity. So they do need to catch up there if they truly want to make the cloud the thing it is. But I don't know. I think what they're doing is good, and I don't say that as someone who, I do have a PC and I play a lot of games on it, but I say that as someone who fully intends on buying the next Xbox. I hope that they keep being financially successful, because that keeps their doors open, that keeps them making games, and that keeps them making hardware. Hardware isn't going to be their focus. If anything, they might be more experimental, and they might make more interesting hardware, especially the handheld that's coming, if they don't have to worry about outselling the PlayStation. If it becomes part of their business to just be like, yeah, we might just sell 20 million of them, that's fine. Now, when it comes to doing things at scale and the cost savings you get and stuff from that may suffer a bit. But I've almost thought about how it could end up being a benefit to them to not try to worry about outselling PlayStation, especially when they can't. They just can't. PlayStation has too thick of an install base at this point. You just can't do it, at least not in the next 10 to 15 years. So, and by then, who knows what we'll even be playing on, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Hopefully I don't have to look back at this one day and realize I was wrong. I don't think I will. Moving on to the next story, the Division 2's Brooklyn DLC has been delayed. The current content year, it's technically year 6, which goes from like last summer to this summer, is the rough year. They were supposed to have this, the season 3, which was going to begin very soon, was going to be this big new DLC, this big story DLC that they've been touting for a while. And then they were going to have a season 4 bit of content that would follow that up. That is now not the case. They are saying that the DLC will come in 2025, but it'll come as part of year 7, and they haven't specified when. So that could be anywhere from this summer to this fall, or even this winter, next winter. So we'll have to wait and see. I love both Division games. I know a ton of devs over there, and I am or was particularly close with a few of them. I could chat with them anytime I want. I just suspect they're very busy right now. It's the franchise that got me into content creation. This podcast, the Baunfire, at one point was the Echo Cast, which was a reference to the Division, and it was a straight up Division podcast until a couple years ago. So I love this franchise. I like the people who work on it. I don't like Ubisoft, but I do love Ubisoft Massive, the actual studio. But admittedly, I basically don't like everything they've done since the release of the game of Division 2. I love that game. It came out in a really good, it was one of the first looter shooters to come out in like pretty workable shape at the beginning, like from the start, even though they did have some issues as time went on. The main story, I loved it. I thought being in DC, I thought it was beautiful. It was a lot of fun. The changes they made between the two games, I thought were great. And then you hit the end game and you find out that you have to like go through these like 5, world levels or whatever it was called. And then you get the actual ending that introduces this big final faction and all that. To me, that's where the game ended. Because just a few months later, less than a year later, they released their first DLC. Really, it was an expansion is the better word. That's what they call it. And it was Warlords of New York. And it was this story that took us back to New York City. The Division 1 took place in like middle Manhattan. And the Warlords of New York expansion for Division 2 took place in lower Manhattan. And to this day, I still 100% believe that Warlords of New York was supposed to be a Division 1 expansion. And it just didn't make it. So to me, it always felt like it was shoehorned into 2 because the story makes like no sense in 2, at least in my opinion. I'm sure they made changes to make it fit better, but I still have a conspiracy theory that was 100% a Division 1 DLC. Likely was meant to bring us into Division 2 and Washington, DC and all that. Anyways, I digress. My issue is that things happen in that DLC, and especially things have happened since then. They, after that DLC came out, they started this yearly content thing. Year 1, year 2, year 3. Year 2 had no content, by the way. It was because the game was supposed to be done after year 1, and then they decided to keep going, and now they've kept going and going and going, and they're making a year 7, which I think is a huge mistake. I appreciate the hard work. I love Yannick is the current creative director on Division 2 on the post-launch content. He's amazing. I love him. I've actually done an interview with him. If you want to check out some of my old podcasts, you can find that. I don't have any bad words for the people actually working on the game, but so many of the things they've done in these manhunts, the manhunts they would take months to conclude because they just release bits and pieces every few weeks, and literally you would play for months and you would end up basically getting a few minutes of new story or lore. And some of the reveals were kind of cool and some of them were pretty lackluster, and some characters have just disappeared even though they seemed like they were really big parts of the game, and some storylines have just kind of disappeared even though they seem pretty essential, even though we have April Keller just sitting there waiting to be part of the series again, but probably just in a book one day. I don't know. And then really in more recent times, like early in the manhunts, they had a manhunt where they brought back a an NPC back to life who we killed a billion times in a mission in the first game. And so they brought him back to life. And you can tell they were, and at the time I didn't realize it, but they were setting the stage for things they were going to do later. And they brought back this character, and that's it. Started feeling, oh, what are they doing? Like, okay, whatever, I'll go with it. We'll keep going. And we kept going. And the story, the seasonal content, was pretty rich in the first couple years that they did, and then it started getting more repetitive, and the current seasonal system, in my opinion, is awful. It's so bad. It's not exciting or interesting. They have the little lore bits, and I get that from 5-10 minute videos from the people who still cover the game on YouTube instead of spending hours playing it, right? And now we're to the point where, in a recent season, they brought back the main villain from the dead in an explanation that I hate, as well as another one of the villains from the Warlords of New York DLC. And now we're working with them. And it's an unsteady alliance. And it's just, this last season's the first season I didn't play. I played one part of it, and I haven't touched it since, because I've been waiting for the DLC. I'm done with that. And what I'm so concerned about more than anything with the Division 2 is that, at the end of the base game, there was some really, it was pretty open where they could go with like a Division 3. And we know they're making a Division 3. But the story has become so convoluted and so messy, and in my opinion, so bad and unbelievable, and so like way too sci-fi, and just has really lost its like kind of grounded feel, I guess. And now, like, my hope, and I know they're not going to do this, I kind of want them to retcon basically everything from Warlords of New York after, and then let Division 3 take up after the events of 2, the base game. I know that's not going to happen. They've spent all these time and resources, and I assume they're going to carry at least some of the stuff over. And then we have this delay of this DLC, and the DLC doesn't even sound like it's like, I'm going to guess it's going to be like 2 or 3 hours of gameplay, of new gameplay. And, this is after multiple delays, and we still don't really know when it's going to come out. I just, I have a lot of love for this studio. I'm super excited about the third game, even though I'm terrified about what's going on at Ubisoft and how that may affect them. But I really wish someone would have put their foot down years ago. After Warlords came out and they did that year of content, I wish then they would have said, because they probably had this DLC planned for a long time. Okay, we're going to spend the year where they made no content. We're going to spend this year making this DLC. We're going to put that out. We're going to put some seasonal stuff for people to do on rotation. And we're just going to let Division 2 ride. And we're going to work on Division 3, put it out. That was going to be hard for them to do because the team that made Division 2 was working on Star Wars Outlaws, which didn't come out until 2024, So they were occupied. So I guess they couldn't do that because there's no one to work on the game. And this little Division 2 team is really small. And they were getting support from outside studios. I don't know if they are anymore. I understand why they've done what they've done, but I'm still not happy about it. So. And then we did get a live stream on the 30th of January from a creative director. I never remember how to say his last name. Yannick Bouchurou, I believe. Talking about the delay in upcoming PTS. He did confirm that the DLC is called Battle for Brooklyn, and it will release in 2025. And they'll reveal more about it during the March Division Day celebration. It's the anniversary. This is going to be the 2025. Goodness gracious. So 9-year anniversary of the series, which is pretty cool. He also said, well, he didn't say it, but they showed some key art from it. They didn't show any gameplay, but the key art from it, all of the trees have yellow and orange leaves and they're falling off. So this will be the first time in Division 2 we will see some content take place in a different season. This, to me, I think it's almost guaranteed that this DLC is going to be the bridge between 2 and 3. And because I am like 99% sure 3 is going to take place in winter, or at least I hope it does, because I want to get back to that aesthetic. I want to see the new snowdrop tech, be able to do all the snow effects and all that stuff. I want to see us have the cool old attire that we had in the first game, because the apparel in the second game The all of that is awful. It's been awful since the game released, and I don't think they've released any good apparel since the game came out. That's my hot take on that. So I really hope that if the next game takes place in the winter again, they go back and they look at what they did in the first game and they try to do that again, because what they did in Division 2 with the apparel, with the Division fashion is awful. It's really bad. That's my hot take. And then finally, they said that they're going to expand the stash. That's been a long controversy that they haven't or they wouldn't expand the stash. Well, they're going to now, so have fun with that. Hitting up some other kind of quick stories because I'm running quite long. Sony has announced that Hiroki Totoki is now the president and CEO of the company, and that Hideki Nishino is the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and who has been the acting co-CEO or whatever, or co-president, Herman Holst, is being demoted down to still a senior position, but I believe he's going to be overlooking the game studios. Pretty interesting. This is all in the time after their previous SIE CEO is gone and retired, who seems like he was the one who made this big live service push, potentially with Holst's support or help, and that's crashed and burned really hard for PlayStation. It's so interesting to me that Xbox takes up so much of the room with news, and mostly people being negative about it, that it blows my mind every day that there aren't more stories about, like, hey, like, there's not very many PlayStation first party games. Like, where are they? Like, what is Santa Monica working on? Like, we know what Naughty Dog is working on now, but what are all these studios? We know what Insomniac's working on, because they're the only studio that puts out games regularly for them. All the other studios put out like one game per gen now. And this seems like that was probably exacerbated by this big live service push that they started a few years ago that just hasn't been successful. We now know that that Bend has canceled their next game, which I thought was a story already, but it was presented as new. So there you go. And Concord came out and it got shut down a week later and was a huge failure. Like, I still don't think that got talked about enough as like being one of the biggest oopsies that a game publisher has made in a really long time, because they bought the studio mid development and paid they paid a decent amount of money for it, and then it's estimated they put almost $500 million into the development of that game, and it was out for a week and they refunded everyone. They didn't make a penny off of it. They lost. Like, that's why when I was talking about before, that even though PlayStation makes way more revenue than Xbox, they don't actually make as much money profit wise, because they're not as efficient, or they spend their money in other ways, right? So I assume this move at both Sony and PlayStation is reflective of Sony probably being like, okay, we're reining power back in and back home. We're going to get our own people and everything. The experiment was cool with having some more like kind of outsiders be in charge, but we're bringing it back, and that's what's going to happen. And I'm curious to how that plays out. What I'm really curious about is to see if we see big, like, strategic changes, which we already have started to. A story just came out in the last day or two that Sony's almost certainly, they've made some changes with their online stuff that is setting the stage for them to probably start releasing games day and date on PC. We will not be seeing PlayStation release any of their first party titles on Xbox. That is not going to happen. The only reason that the show is on Xbox is because the MLB mandated it, and it's not even on Game Pass this year. So interesting movement over there at Sony. I'm curious to see what happens. Summer Game Fest has announced their show will be on June 6th, and they're going to have their business event that's going to happen around the same time. And they made this announcement with the most obviously AI generated logo, picture, whatever I've ever seen. And it was so ugly. Like, if it's not AI, if I'm wrong, which I don't think I am, then like, I feel bad, but they just made some of the ugliest art I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't believe a human would make art like that. And the fact that Jeff like is cool with that being one, obviously AI, in a time where like, voice actors are still trying to get like EA to sign a contract to not replace them with AI, is just kind of gross. But he's just like the tackiest dude, man. So it doesn't surprise me. The entire editorial staff of God is a Geek, which is a religious based gaming news outlet, has resigned after the owner, who's a priest, a Catholic priest who's been defrocked already, he threw up a Nazi salute at a pro-life event. And I saw the video, and it's just like the Elon thing, man. I try not to get too political in the show, but if you've seen this, there's been like controversies in the past where like a person kind of held up their hand awkwardly, and you could tell they were kind of like, trying to like be a little edgy. Well, at the Republican, whatever congregation that was after the election and after the inauguration, like Elon straight up threw like a Nazi salute. And then this priest did it too, which is so strange. Like, we're in weird times, man. Very strange times. And then the final story, some justice here, at least in my opinion, is Midnight Society, the studio co-founded by Dr. Disrespect, before they dropped him for trying to solicit sexual activity with a minor. The studio that was also trying to make an NFT extraction shooter game, they're shutting down. So I'll never celebrate people losing their jobs. Dr. Disrespect wasn't even associated with these people. I actually, through multiple connections, know one of the main, like the people in leadership at that studio. He's a former Call of Duty developer. He's from a town. He went to school with one of my best friends from college, so I very distantly have some connection to this guy. It sucks. I feel bad for the developers who have worked on this stupid game for years, had to deal with all of this drama and all of this stuff being connected to that guy, and then their game never comes out and they get shut down. And now their resume, which a bunch of these people were probably first-time devs, now their resume is like already in bad shape because, I'm sure it's not bad to have some work on there, but if this is the work, I'm sure it's not ideal. With the only content update I have is that I do plan on recording another episode of the Mass Effect Hypecast. That's my show. That's basically about the next game and all the updates and news around BioWare. I'm going to talk about all the, some of the recent rumors that came out before the blog. I'm going to talk about the blog and all the big changes happening at the studio, kind of their recommitment to the game and how I feel about that. And I'm going to cover anything that they talk about during their 30th anniversary this weekend. I'm assuming that 30th anniversary is literally going to be them just like putting out a tweet being like, hey, it's our 30th anniversary. Thank you for being fans. Like, I'm not expecting more than that, but it would be cool if there was more. And then on the 4th, they're doing, EA is doing their big investor call. I think the leaked or the info they already put out about Dragon Age and FIFA or EA FC 25 not doing well, like that's probably the bulk of the news we're going to get, but we'll see if we get any more tidbits and if they make any commentary on the changes happening at BioWare. It wouldn't surprise me if we find out like how many people are still actually at BioWare. I've been trying to find that out myself, but understandably people aren't really willing to talk about specifics. I'm wondering if it's like, according to Mark Dara, during the development of Dragon Age, the late development, it sounds like they were around 250 to 300 devs. With all of the people they seem to have moved, my guess is that they're down to like 100 devs, and that may even be a high guess. So if I can get any more info, I'll talk about it on there. But that's what's coming up. New podcast over on the other podcast, the Mass Effect Hypecast. So follow that if you don't already. And that is where I am going to wrap this thing up. If you have any questions or feedback, be sure to comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Baundiesel or at the Baunfire. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. And until next time.